Hello and welcome to this episode of the Ideas Factory. I'm Naghma and with me is Professor Pant. There are a couple of important things that we will look at on this episode, beginning with India-China and India-Pakistan. There has been a disengagement at the LAC as well as a ceasefire at the LoC, and we will look into why now and what next. Along with that, the Biden administration now, just more than a month that it has taken charge, there has been a couple of big decisions that it has taken. First of all, vis-a-vis Syria, the bombing that has taken place in Syria and the Doha talks that are going on. So what are the chances of the Biden administration in Afghanistan? We will also look at that. Let's begin with India-China, Harsh, and that's top of the mind for everyone, and India-Pakistan. And these both come just one after the other. So first of all, we saw the disengagement at the LAC, and then there has been an order of ceasefire at the LoC. Now, we all know that India-Pakistan relationships have seen ups and downs, and it goes through a cycle. But last 5 years, it was on a downward trajectory. Now, this glimmer of hope, how do you see this really? What is different now? And also the question of why now and what next?
Well, I think, if there was any doubt, in the minds of people that, that LAC and LoC are not linked, I think this in some ways takes that doubt away, because what we have seen now is movement on two fronts as far as India is concerned. And I think partly it seems that, what happened on the China border perhaps allowed India that confidence to also move ahead with the Pakistanis on the LoC. Clearly, LoC ceasefires, we'll have to see how they pan out. We know that ceasefires often along the LoC don't really mean much, given that the kind of tensions that have always prevailed there. But on the LAC, for example, we are seeing the disengagement process starting, and we have also seen the Indian Foreign Minister talking to his Chinese counterpart on the LAC. India making it very clear that this is this is the beginning of a long drawn out process, whereas Chinese are talking of restoring of normalcy. India is making it very clear that it will have to take it step by step, one step at a time. So I think on the LAC, India's message is clear about that we will go one step at a time first, disengagement, then de-escalation. And then we will see whether normalcy we can go back to a pre-2020 phase. On the LoC, on the other hand, we are looking at India now giving another chance to make sure that LoC comes back to some degree of some semblance of normalcy. And I think the be slightly different, but clearly India is messaging that it is ready now to engage to a certain level at the military level with Pakistan to see that the LoC becomes more stable than it has been in the recent past. And as we know, that the process between India and Pakistan has seen so many ups and downs, and the ceasefire itself has been broken so many times, and the Pakistani commitment to ceasefire remains so problematic that one cannot really ascertain whether this is going to be any more sustainable than in the past. But I think what has happened, the confidence that India has gained from the LAC, and also certain rather larger geopolitical changes, the coming in of Biden administration also allows that possibility to move forward. And the fact that Biden administration so far has not indicated that it's going to be any less forceful vis-a-vis Pakistan than the predecessor. So I think all of that has allowed that possibility to emerge, that these two countries can engage, that India at least militarily can now test the waters and see what Pakistan does when it comes to LoC.
And now this order of ceasefire, it also clearly shows that it is General Bajwa who's talking peace and not Prime Minister Imran Khan.
Yes, of course. And I think from India's side, that has always been quite clear that the military is going to take the decision, that military ultimately is the final arbiter. But it has also been a problem in terms of the long-term trajectory of Pakistan, because clearly if military, on the one hand, India and other interlocutors of Pakistan would like some semblance of stability in Pakistan, if policy movements, if policy decisions are to be taken, But the challenge is if military continues to dominate the Pakistani polity, then also the long-term trajectory of Pakistan becomes, the democratic trajectory of Pakistan becomes highly problematic. And that creates this problem of long-term and short-term agendas that countries who deal with Pakistan face. What do you do? Do you deal with whoever is in power in the short term, and that means most of the time the military, and make and this over the long term then deprives the democratic governments of legitimacy, deprives the democratic governments of that space. But I think that's an internal Pakistani matter that Pakistani polity needs to shape and decide. For the external interlocutors, and in particular with regard to India, we would like certain normalcy, both not only along the LAC, but larger normalcy in the relationship. But that is not possible if we do not have a government that is in charge, and that it seems that Mr. Imran Khan's government is clearly not under control, and everything is talked of as the nominated or the selected prime minister, and he has lived up to that billing.
All right. And while we are talking about Pakistan, let's also look at Afghanistan, Harsh. The talk between the Afghan government and Taliban has happened after, much delay and an escalation on violence and a change in leadership in America. What chances do you think does the Biden administration really have in Afghanistan? They are re-looking at the Doha agreement, whereas the Taliban are very adamant that they do not want the US forces to stay there any further, no extension. There seems to be a consensus in Washington that the US forces should stay on. I mean, there should be a delay in the withdrawal. So while these talks take place, what are the chances that the US has in Afghanistan?
Well, at the moment, the main difference seems that clearly we are looking at a Biden administration that is certainly taking a step back and re-looking at what is happening in Pakistan, and perhaps the idea that in Pakistan. In Afghanistan, clearly the challenge lies is that while the Trump administration had made sure that it wanted to get the troops out as soon as possible, as fast as possible. I think Biden administration is making a case that perhaps it needs a greater strategic look at what is happening in Afghanistan, and how do you then relook at the Taliban offensive. Now, Taliban have been on the offensive. Taliban are making it very clear that they look at this as a very important moment. But clearly the Doha Accords, something last year at this point in time, you might recall, everyone was thinking that end is near, that certainly we would see a greater break from the past. But we know that has not been possible, and for all of Mr. Trump's proclivities, he could not really push the American agenda on the ground. And I think now that Mr. Biden is looking at it, and his advisors perhaps are advising him that go slow, go one step at a time. We need to really not give Taliban all that they want. We really need to keep the initiative with us. And I think all those things will slow down the process as it is evolving on the ground. And I think many in the Afghan government, for example, also want that to happen. They don't want a precipitous withdrawal. Many regional interlocutors also, I think, are looking at it with a wariness, American withdrawal with a sense of wariness. And I think if you look at India, for example, India's coordinating more in recent weeks and months with countries like Russia and Iran, partly because there is a sense that we don't know which way Mr. Biden would really turn. He has not given any indication so far that he's really going to change dramatically Mr. Trump's policies. He remains in favor of withdrawal, but under what conditions would that withdrawal take place, and whether Taliban would have a carte blanche in deciding the withdrawal, that I think is up for question. I think that negotiations that are happening certainly have been delayed a bit, and I think a year ago when Doha Accords were signed, that sense of momentum perhaps has been lost, partly on account of the violence that is taking place, and also partly because of a change in administration in Washington. As Washington decides to take this step by step and to take it more gradually, perhaps, than it would have happened under Mr. Trump. I think there is still a space available for regional interlocutors, for regional stakeholders to come together and make it clear to the Taliban that violence of the kind that we have witnessed perhaps would not be tolerated.
So, with the change in the US administration, there are certain other policy changes that we are witnessing. For example, if you look at Syria, now 36 days into presidency, Biden administration decided to bomb Syria. This also signals it gives out a message to Iran. It also says that while the negotiation, or while the US works into coaxing Iran back into the negotiation, it will also not hesitate in taking actions against the Iranian militia. Now, all of that, what kind of message does it really give out, that while it is turned against the Iranian militia, the negotiation will take place, and or will it affect the Iran-US relationship with this current bombing or action against the Iranian-backed militia that we've seen in Syria?
America has so many interests in the Middle East, and they are often at odds with each other. Now, for clearly, Mr. Biden, when he was campaigning, JCPOA reviving the Iranian nuclear deal was a big deal. And therefore, he wanted to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. And he still has made those overtures. But I think the larger issue here is that the world has changed since when the JCPOA was signed, and Middle East has changed. So clearly, at the ground level, a lot of churn has happened. We have seen how Iran versus the rest, almost, Israel and the Arab Gulf states have come together. We also know how the Syrian equation, how the Syrian situation has evolved. And Iranian influence across the region has been increasing. Iran has also been signaling that it would be really unwilling to take back, the scale back the kind of enrichment gains that it has made over the last few years. According to UN, for example, Iranians are now capable of enriching much higher degree of uranium than before. So clearly, I think the trend lines are that in some ways, for Mr. Biden to go back to the Barack Obama phase of JCPOA will be very, very problematic and difficult. But he has made it very clear to the Iranians that he wants to start the process. And Iranians in turn have made it very clear that they would like to first see some changes on sanctions, etc. Now, within that, I think it would have been, it is important for Mr. Biden to show that he still has an upper hand, that he is still willing to tackle Iranian expansionist designs in the region from American position. So I think clearly Iranian proxies who are fighting from Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, there is a sense that perhaps Iran's influence has risen, and these proxies, these militias, are doing great damage to the region. So from American perspective, from the perspective of American allies in the region, it is important that America sends out this message. So that's what Mr. Biden seems to have done, is to send out a message to Iran that while, yes, we will sit down and talk, but clearly you don't have a carte blanche. You don't really decide what happens in the region, and we will strike back at a place and time of our choosing. And so if you see, there was an attack in Iraq on America, on an American base, which I think led to the killing of one American contractor. And in retaliation, after 2 weeks, Americans targeted Syria, Iranian proxies in Syria. And I think that back and forth between Iran and America perhaps has been the story of the last decade in the Middle East. And that is unlikely to go away, despite the intentions of Mr. Biden, because Iran clearly feels that it has developed enough equities in the region that it wants to preserve. And America would like to show both to its regional partners as well as to domestic audience. I think it is important for Mr. Biden not to be seen as a weak president from the very beginning. Clearly, as his presidency is starting, he's already talking about negotiating with Iran, and there'll be enough people back home who would say that this is a posture of weakness. You really need to demonstrate resolve, and you really need to demonstrate that you are capable enough when it comes to leading these negotiations. So I think he's also painting a certain kind of a picture about his own resolve, about his administration when it comes to Iran. And of course, the connection with, this is happening simultaneously with with the report, the declassified report on Khashoggi. So US-Saudi relations are also moving in a different trajectory. So there is a wider regional architecture that is being created, which it would be interesting to see how it develops. But clearly, America has too many stakes in the region for it to be ignored.
Absolutely. And when you talk of Khashoggi, the ex-president Trump had very clearly, in fact, admitted that he had saved the crown prince from the US legislatures, and they refused to release the full Khashoggi report. But now that this report names the Saudi prince, Saudi Arabia has been a strategic ally of Washington here. In fact, it views Riyadh as a linchpin in its wider Middle East policy. This naming of the crown prince, what does it really say? First of all, of course, reassessing the US-Saudi relationship. Also, does it really give out that message that crown prince MBS is now not really that important in the scheme of things, and King Salman would be the main person who Washington would be dealing with, because the report clearly names the prince?
Yes, I think it is a big setback for MBS, in the sense that it would be very difficult now for Washington or for other Western governments to publicly deal with MBS. But there is another reality that King Salman and MBS are almost inseparable at the moment. King Salman is very old. He is dealing most of his external outreach is via MBS. So it's very difficult to see how this pans out. That I don't think Saudi, the kingdom is unlikely to give up MBS, in any way, because he's also domestically very popular. So for America to make this shift or to try to push a change within Saudi would be very, very difficult. I don't think that's likely to happen.
So, but what
What we might see is a gradual scaling down.
What signal is it then giving out by naming Prince Salman, and why name him, or what will be the implication?
Well, I think the biggest implication would be that U.S.-Saudi relationship might be very turbulent for some time now, because in both ways this is a big embarrassment for the MBS, and I think he would not take it lightly. And also for Biden administration now going forward, as they craft a policy for the region, it would be very difficult. As you were mentioning, the U.S.-Saudi relationship had been the linchpin of the regional architecture when American foreign policy centerpiece relationship. Now that relationship is undergoing a dramatic shift. Now that relationship is undergoing a change, and I think that turbulence will affect other stakeholders. You have again we are talking about Iran, how Iran perceives it, how you have other partners like other Arab Gulf states perceive it. I think these are serious questions for America's Middle East policy. Mr. Trump took one position where he tried to almost ignore MBS and his shenanigans. Mr. Biden has taken another approach where he's trying to bring it out into the open. Now, I think on both policy options, the costs are high for America, and it would be interesting to see now how they try to carve out this balance in the relationship, because clearly, American position, given what we have just witnessed in Syria, America cannot shift from Saudi to Iran. That is not going to happen. And there is a larger relationship, larger reality in the Middle East that they are going to nurture. But for America to name MBS like this in a report, to frontally confront him, I think with that we have entered an entirely different phase in the relationship. This is a relationship that used to be behind the curtains most of the time. Most of the discussions were implicit in the arrangement. Now, I think perhaps the Biden administration has taken a decision for various reasons. And again, human rights is one big issue which they want to bring to the center stage, that this is too important a value to be ignored, and therefore MBS had to be confronted. Now, it remains to be seen whether this is a short-term measure, whether they will try to somehow then reach out to MBS in different ways, because Saudi Arabia is working through MBS. It's not working. Even Biden administration may want to say that they will only deal with the king, but king is in no way, his health, his age, means that MBS increasingly will remain the face of Saudi Arabia. So it will be, I think, very, very interesting to see what are the policy implications for this, for American foreign policy, as well as I think for larger Middle Eastern policy, and what direction MBS, and how he perceives this slight, this insult, and how he takes this forward in his dealings with other regional players, as well as Washington.
So that's something really interesting to watch out for. Though MBS remains the face of Saudi Arabia, which America and the rest of the world will have to deal with him, because King Salman is not really in good health. It remains to be seen what implication does this report really have on the US-Saudi relationship, and in that context also the larger relationship in the Middle East region. So thank you so much for that analysis, Harsh, and that's it from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. See you next week.